Niccolo Machiavelli wrote that the cleverest princes make their conquests look like something else entirely. They never call it domination, they call it protection. They never call it exploitation, they call it partnership. In 1945, America learned that lesson, and for the next 75 years, they built the largest empire in human history. But nobody called it an empire. Here's how they did it. Let's start with a fact. The United States military operates over 750 bases in more than 80 countries. That's more than Britain, France, Russia, and China combined. American corporations dominate global markets. The US dollar is the world's reserve currency, meaning nearly every international transaction, from oil sales to international debt, is conducted in American money. Hollywood exports American culture to every corner of the planet. American tech companies control the flow of global information. And when conflicts arise anywhere on Earth, the question isn't, will America get involved? It's when. By every historical definition, military reach, economic dominance, cultural influence, this is an empire. But walk into any American school, open any textbook, listen to any politician, and you'll never hear that word. They call it leadership. They call it partnership. They call it the defense of freedom. Machiavelli would call it genius. So how did they do it? How did America build the world's most powerful empire without anyone calling it one? The answer lies in 3 strategies, and all of them are straight out of Machiavelli's playbook. Let's go back to the beginning. In the 1800s, America didn't hide what it was doing. They called it manifest destiny, the belief that America was destined to expand across the continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This was conquest, plain and simple. Millions of Native Americans were displaced, entire nations erased. Mexico lost half its territory. But the language made it sound inevitable, not conquest, destiny. Machiavelli understood this. He wrote, "Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but very few can feel." Translation: what you call something matters more than what it actually is. By 1898, America had reached the Pacific, but they didn't stop. The Spanish-American War gave them control of Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Suddenly, America had overseas territories, colonies. But they didn't call them that. They called it benevolent assimilation. They weren't colonizers, they were liberators. The Philippines didn't need independence. They needed American guidance. At least, that's what Washington said. In reality, the Philippine-American War killed between 200,000 and 1 million Filipinos. But back home, it was framed as a civilizing mission, not imperialism, progress. Then came World War II. And this is where the language changed forever. America didn't invade Europe. It liberated it. It didn't occupy Japan. It rebuilt it. And when the war ended and American troops stayed, in Germany, in Japan, in South Korea, they weren't called occupiers. They were called protectors. And here's the brilliance of it. Those countries agreed. Because after the devastation of World War II, American protection seemed like a gift, not a chain. Machiavelli would recognize this immediately. He wrote that a prince must learn to appear generous even when acting in pure self-interest. America mastered that. Every deployment was framed as defensive. Every intervention was framed as humanitarian. The empire was real. The branding was perfect. To this day, America doesn't have colonies. It has allies. It doesn't have subjects. It has partners. It doesn't invade. It intervenes. Control the language and you control the perception. In 1944, while World War II was still raging, representatives from 44 nations gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. Officially, they were there to create a new global financial system. In reality, they were there to make the US dollar the center of the world economy. Here's how it worked. The US dollar would be backed by gold. Every other currency would be pegged to the dollar. If you wanted to trade internationally, you needed dollars. And the only country that could print dollars? The United States. This was empire building without a single shot fired. America didn't need to occupy your country. It just needed to control your money. Then came the Marshall Plan. Between 1948 and 1952, the United States gave over $13 billion, worth over $150 billion today, to rebuild war-torn Europe. History books call this generosity. Machiavelli would call it strategy, because the aid came with conditions. European countries had to buy American goods. They had to open their markets to American corporations. They had to accept American military bases on their soil. And they had to align with American foreign policy. Within 5 years, Western Europe was rebuilt, but it was rebuilt dependent. Not occupied, not conquered, just structurally tied to American economic interests. Machiavelli wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." America found a third option: be needed. And that dependency still exists today. In 1971, President Nixon ended the gold standard, meaning the dollar was no longer backed by anything except trust. But by then, it didn't matter. The entire global economy was already built on the dollar. If you want to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, you need dollars. If you want to trade with China, you need dollars. If your country's currency collapses, you borrow dollars from the IMF, which the US controls. This is why American sanctions are so devastating. When the US freezes a country out of the dollar system, like it did to Iran, to Russia, to Venezuela, it's not just cutting off trade with America, it's cutting off trade with the world. Britain enforced its empire with the Royal Navy. America enforces its empire with the Federal Reserve. And just like Britain before it, America doesn't call this control. It calls it global leadership. Machiavellian branding, imperial structure. Here's a number that most Americans don't know. The United States operates over 750 military bases in more than 80 countries. For comparison, Britain at the height of its empire had around 100. But here's what makes this different. Britain occupied its colonies. Governors ruled from colonial capitals. The British flag flew over foreign capitals. Everyone knew it was an empire. America doesn't do that. American bases exist on foreign soil, but they're called partnerships. The host country technically remains sovereign. The American flag doesn't replace the local one.
it just flies next to it. Machiavelli would understand this perfectly. He wrote that a prince should avoid being hated because hatred invites rebellion. If you occupy a country, the people see you as a conqueror. But if you're invited, if you're there to protect them, resistance is harder to justify. Take NATO. On paper, it's a defensive alliance. In reality, it's the political structure that allows 30 countries to host American troops and follow American strategic interests. But because they sign treaties agreeing to it, it's not called occupation. It's called collective defense. And when NATO expands, when countries that were once Soviet-aligned now host American missiles, Russia calls it encirclement. America calls it freedom of choice. Same action, different framing. The US military doesn't need to occupy territory the way past empires did. It projects power from the sea, from the air, from bases that can deploy forces anywhere in the world within hours. This is what historians call hegemony, dominance without direct control. Machiavelli would call it efficient imperialism. And when America does invade, like in Iraq in 2003 or Afghanistan in 2001, the language never changes. It's not conquest, it's liberation. It's not occupation, it's nation building. It's not empire, it's the war on terror. Machiavelli wrote, "A prince must learn how not to be good." He didn't mean be evil. He meant understand that survival and morality operate on different planes. America learned that lesson. The invasions happened, the bases stayed, but the framing remained moral. And when people resist, when protesters demand American troops leave Okinawa or Iraq or Germany, they're not called freedom fighters, they're called fringe. Because the official story is that America is there by invitation, that it's wanted, that it's needed. 750 bases, 80 countries, and not one of them is called a colony. So let's step back. Rome called its conquests Pax Romana, Roman peace. Britain called its empire a civilizing mission. America calls its dominance leadership of the free world. Different eras, same strategy. Machiavelli saw it 500 years ago. Power without pretense is tyranny. Power with pretense is empire. So why did it work? Why did America succeed in building an empire without anyone calling it one? First, timing. America rose to dominance just as the old empires were collapsing. Britain, France, the Netherlands, they were exhausted, broke, morally discredited by the horrors of colonialism. The world was ready for something that looked different, even if it functioned the same. Second, branding. America didn't create an empire, it created a rules-based international order. It didn't dominate, it led.
And because it fought against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan, two genuinely monstrous regimes, it had moral credibility. The good guys don't build empires. So whatever America was building couldn't be an empire. Third, soft power. Britain ruled with the whip. America ruled with the carrot. Hollywood made American culture desirable. Coca-Cola made American products ubiquitous. McDonald's made American lifestyles aspirational. You don't need to force people to accept your dominance if they already want to be like you. And fourth, and this is the most Machiavellian part, America let other countries think they had a choice. Britain told India, "You're ruled by us." America told Western Europe, "You're allied with us." Same result. But one sounded like domination. The other sounded like partnership. Machiavelli wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few feel what you are." America appeared to be a benevolent protector, but beneath that appearance was the same structure every empire has always had: military dominance, economic control, and the willingness to use force when necessary. The CIA toppled democratically elected governments in Iran, Guatemala, Chile, and dozens of other countries. Not because they were threats to America, because they were threats to American interests. That's not the behavior of a partner. That's the behavior of an empire. But here's the thing about pretense. It only works as long as people believe it. Today, the illusion is fading. China doesn't see America as a protector. It sees a rival. Russia doesn't see NATO as defensive. It sees encirclement. Much of the global South doesn't see American interventions as liberation. It sees hypocrisy. For 75 years, America maintained the pretense. It was the empire that wasn't an empire, the hegemon that was just helping. But Machiavelli warned about this too. He wrote, "All empires fall, not because they lose power, but because they forget that power must be constantly justified." Rome forgot, Britain forgot, and now America is starting to forget. The bases are still there. The dollar is still dominant. The military is still unmatched. But the story? The story that made it all acceptable, that's cracking. So here's the question Machiavelli would ask. How much longer can you be an empire without calling it one? How much longer can you dominate without admitting you dominate? History suggests not much longer. If you want to understand how power really works, not how they say it works, subscribe to the Machiavellian lens. Because empires don't advertise, but they always leave a pattern. And we're here to find it.